All right. So again, welcome everybody to the financial aid presentation tonight. As Courtney said, my name is Katie Koussis. I am the Director of Financial Aid at Niagara. Although I'm from Niagara, we are not going to talk specifically about Niagara's financial aid. This is about financial aid in general, regardless of what school you might be attending. So it covers just overview. What if you check in the chat box, in two documents. One is the FAFSA on the web worksheet that we're going to go over in detail tonight, and the other one is our financial aid brochure that talks a little bit about Niagara, but it's more so, again, just general. It has all the websites in there that we go over tonight and some other forms we will talk about. So just some things for you guys to peruse, and we will get started. Questions, if you want to, as we go along so you don't forget, or again, we can go over them at the end as well. And if you haven't already, if you could also mute yourselves just so it doesn't have a lot of interference going over for recording. Here's my contact information. If you do have any questions about just financial aid in general or about the presentation or want to contact us, feel free to either give me a call or shoot me an email. The office would be more than happy to help. The first step is that you need to apply for your FSA ID. So the website for that is on the slide. You will need one for the student and one for at least one of the parents. Both parents don't need to do it. We do recommend sometimes that both parents at some point get an FSA ID, and this would help if you're applying for perhaps like a Parent Plus loan, which we'll get to down the road. So you might want to have one for each parent, but it's not necessary. Only one parent needs to sign the FAFSA form. This is your electronic signature for the FAFSA and any other federal applications down the road. So this is something that you want to keep track of, your username and your password. And one note is that to please make sure you are using separate email addresses when setting these up. You need one for the parent and one for the student, but they must be separate email addresses, or else it will mess things up a little bit, and it's a more of a complicated process to try to figure that out. You're going to go to is fsaid.gov website to actually sign up for those. You can use those at any time. You can also do it while you're in the FAFSA, but it doesn't hurt to kind of get ahead of the game for that. Now, the one thing we're going to go over is the FAFSA on the web worksheet. This is not something that you actually mail in. It's more of and it's not every single question you're going to have to answer. It's more of an overview. But it does give you a good background for what you have to do and what you have to have ready for when you do complete the FAFSA. So I'm assuming everyone on here is a current senior in high school, and if so, you'll be completing the 21-22 FAFSA form. You need to be careful because when you do go on to the federal website, there are currently 2 years out there. There's the 2021 year, and there's the 21-22 year. So make sure you're completing the 21-22 FAFSA application so as to not mix up the years. So it's important to note that this is in the student's name. It is the student's FAFSA, although there will most likely be parent information that needs to be put on, and also parents need to sign off on it. It is the student's information. So you need to start filling it out. Hopefully the student is there with you when you're doing this, and that you're doing it together to get the correct information. But you just need to be careful that you're putting the student's information in when it says student and not putting in parents' information. We have had parents put in siblings' social security numbers or their own social security numbers and not the actual student who's attending college. It will ask for the basic student information: first name, last name, date of birth, social security number. Again, make sure you're using the correct one. Is going to make sure or ask if the student is a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. In order to be eligible for any financial aid, federal financial aid, I should say, a student does have to meet one of those two criteria. It's also going to ask if are married, remarried, separated, or divorced, or widowed. In most cases, for high school students, they would be single, of course. Ask the student to complete some additional information. The first thing I wanted to note is that if you are a male student, you do have to sign up for the selective service registration. This is something that potentially might go away at some point, but it's still part of the requirements for FAFSA. So if you don't sign up for the selective service as a male student 18 years or older, you would not be eligible for federal student aid. Now, some students are only 17, of course, when they start college, and that's perfectly okay. But you would just check the box saying you'll sign up, sign me up automatically when I turn 18, or you'll have to go back. And then again, you'd be prevented from receiving any federal aid in the following year if you do not sign up after the age of 18. It's going to ask some information about parent 1 and parent 2. It does not ask mother or father. It is parent 1 or parent 2. It is very important to keep track of which one you're reporting. So if parent 1 is, let's say, mom, when it says for parent 1 income, that you're reporting mom's income. You really do need to be consistent with that. It's then going to ask dependency questions about the student. So if the student is able to answer yes to any of these questions, they would be considered an independent student. And what that means is that as an independent student, that they do not need to provide any additional parent information on there. It is really careful to note, though, that sometimes a student might say, let's say that they're in legal guardianship or in custody or something like that, that would make them independent on the FAFSA. But schools will probably ask for additional documentation. Sometimes students check this off in error. So please make sure that if the student, or if you're the guardian or whatnot, and you're helping the student fill this out and they check one of those boxes, just be prepared that the schools that you're applying to will probably ask for some additional documentation. Typically, we're looking for court documentation that would need to be provided to the schools. But yeah, so for various reasons, whether they're born before 1998, if they're married, they're in the armed services, they're a veteran, foster care, legal guardianship, homeless, there's a variety of things that they could select. But in most cases, as a high school senior, they're not going to be able to say yes to any of these things. And in that case, they would have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. Slot is, okay, I have to report parent information, but which parent do I report? Let's say you are divorced, or you're married or unmarried but living together. So there's different scenarios. So if both bio parents are married, or you're unmarried but you live together in the same house, and again, these are bio parents, you do have to report both parents' income on the FAFSA. Now, in the case of a divorce, you would report whichever parent the student lives with more than 50% of the time with during the prior 12 months. We have 365 days in a year, so in reality, it really can't be 50-50. But I do know there's circumstances where maybe the court said it's half the time with, mom and half the time with dad. So in those cases where, it's 50-50, you would then go to whoever provides the most financial support during those prior 12 months as well. And this could even be, health insurance. Whose health insurance is the student on? So all those things would be considered financial support. So hopefully that helps you determine which parent to report on the FAFSA. Another thing I wanted to mention is that in divorce cases where, let's say, mom and dad are divorced, and student lives with mom is remarried, you would also have to report the step parents' income information on there as well and include them in the household. Even if the step parent doesn't have anything to do with, let's say, providing for the college education, they're still in the household, the income still has to be reported. I get that question a lot. Now that you hopefully know which parent to report, or parents to report on the FAFSA, you would then go ahead and report, again, parent 1 or parent 2 or both. It will then also ask some questions about income. It will ask if the parents filed taxes for 2019. This is prior year tax information that they're asking for. So hopefully by now 2019 taxes have been completed. If not, you would put in your best estimate for what they would be, and then you would have to update that, or should update it, once the taxes are filed. So hopefully, again, if parents have filed the 2019 taxes, they're all set. You would say that they did that. It will also ask you if you want to transfer the information directly from the IRS. This is called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or DIRT. I highly recommend doing this because what it does is that it actually takes the information directly from the IRS that's on file and puts it into your FAFSA form. And this really reduces the chances of being selected for verification by either the government or by the school. It allows there to be accurate information on the FAFSA. It is important to note that although you will check the box to have that kind of transferred over, you actually won't be able to see the information that's being transferred. For security purposes, it does blank everything out. It just tells you what fields were populated, but you can't actually see the amounts that were in there. And again, that's for security purposes. On the back end, the financial aid officers can see all that information, but when you and the student are doing it, you're unable to see that. You just have to trust that it's working, and I promise it is working. The correct numbers are going in. If you don't use the data retrieval tool, you have to manually put all the information in. It will ask for adjusted gross income for the parents, and it will ask you, what tax form you completed so that you can use the correct lines. It's then going to go into not just the AGI and the taxes paid, but it's also going to break down, okay, what did parent 1 make and what did parent 2 make in 2019? This section is not automatically populated. You would have to actually go in there and put in, because of course the wages could be different from the AGI. It's also going to ask if in 2019 or 2020, did anyone in that parent's household receive SSI, Medicaid, free or reduced lunch or SNAP benefits, TANF or WIC, anything like that. If the parent can say that, whether again 2019 or 2020, you would check those boxes. And they're also going to ask some more information of, okay, did anybody or did you receive child support? Did you pay child support? Did you put money towards your 401k? Please note that it's not your total amount of your 401k. It's just what you contributed during the 2019 year. And that information can be found on your W-2 forms in box 12. Typically, I think it's letters like C through E. Might want to double check on that, but it's definitely box 12. So again, you're going to be asked those questions. There's a lot of skip logic involved, so you might not be asked every single one of these questions, but these are things potentially that could be asked. Sometimes depending on how you answer one question, you might not have to answer, the following one. So there is that skip logic involved. So thankfully it kind of goes, a little bit more quickly than it used to back in the day. And then depending upon the questions you answered and how you answered, you might have to then report assets. So based upon income information, based upon how many are in the household, so you do have to also report how many people are living in the household and also how many are in college. So this would be the sibling, or the students themselves who are going to college, and then any siblings that they have that might also be in school at the same time. If the parent is in school, they unfortunately are not counted as being in college on the student's FAFSA. On the parent's FAFSA, yes, but not on the student's FAFSA. So it's really just if the student and any other siblings are in college, you would report that on the current year's FAFSA. So based upon all that other information you put in, you may or may not be asked about asset information. If you are asked about asset information, these are the things that you're going to have to know. So it's your cash, your savings, and your checking accounts, what would be in there as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA. It's net worth of other investments, stocks, bonds, those types of things. And if you have like a business or investment firm, those would be put in there as well. There's different sections for those asset questions. Even though the FAFSA is the 21-22 FAFSA using 2019 tax information, but the assets are as of the current year, the day that you're filling out the FAFSA. It can get a little tricky to kind of keep track of what year you're using, but for assets, it is as of right now. After you put all the information in for the parent, it's then going to go back to the student and pretty much ask all the same questions that the parent just answered. So does the student file taxes? If they did you want to use a data retrieval tool? What was their wages that they had? Now, since this is going back, almost 2 years from when the student, has been working, they might not have had any earnings in that particular year, as maybe they were just sophomore or early junior, so maybe they didn't have those earnings, and that's fine. You would just say did not work, did not earn anything, or did not file taxes. Of course, you can also have the case where the student made money but did not make enough to file. Perfectly okay. You just say, did not have to file, but then you would actually still put in amounts in the wages aspect. It's also, again, going to ask if the student received Medicaid, SSI, SNAP, TANF, WIC. Also be asked all of the additional items as well, child support paid, child support received. Now, most likely, 99% of the time, students are not able to say yes to any of these questions, but they are still asked just in case. And again, same thing, the student might be asked about their assets as well. It's the same set of questions: cash, savings, checkings, stocks, bonds, which typically they don't have, or investments or businesses. So those are the basic things that will be asked on the FAFSA form. Now, in order to fill out the FAFSA, you just go to studentaid.gov, and it will bring you to this site, and you will either say, yes, I'm new to FAFSA.gov, never been here before, I need to start my application, or if you're a returning user, you would then go, of course, to make a correct login. So once you hit on start here, it's going to take you to this page where then you it's going to ask, are you the student or are you the parent? The purpose of them asking this question is just so how they know how to phrase the questions once you're in there. So if you're the parent, once you log in, it'll say, oh, the student's information needs to go here. Whereas if the student is logging in, it's like, what is your information? So it doesn't particularly matter, but it is just a way for them to present the questions differently. We talked about the iris data retrieval tool a little bit. Again, highly recommend that you use this when completing the FAFSA form, just because it does make life a little bit easier for both yourselves and the financial aid officers, and again, lessens the chances that you would be selected for verification. And if you are selected for verification, and what that means, I have said that a couple times, is that when a student is selected for verification on the FAFSA, typically by the government, it just means that they are selecting that student to say that they need to then provide additional information to the school so that we can confirm that all the information on the FAFSA is accurate. Typically, about 30% or so of our students get selected every year. That number's been going down a little bit each year. It seems as they make improvements with the system, less and less people are getting selected. I myself was selected every single year I was a student, unfortunately, so it's just one of those things that you do just have to provide that additional documentation. But if you use a data retrieval tool, you will no longer have to provide the taxes to the school, so that's great. There just might be a few other forms you have to fill out. It was available starting to use October 1st, which is the same day, of course, that the FAFSA opened up for 21-22, so that is open and available. So if you haven't yet completed your FAFSA, I do recommend getting that done pretty quickly. I typically recommend to have it done by Thanksgiving, and I say that just because that gives schools plenty of time to be able to put together financial aid packages to start sending out to students. And also, depending upon the school you're applying to, there might be limited aid available. Now, that's not the case in every school. At Niagara, if you're eligible for the aid, you're eligible for it. There's only a few programs we have that we're limited in funding, like the work study program. We just have limited amounts of jobs available for that. But for the most part, if you're eligible for something, you're going to get it. But that's not the case at every school. So it is important to get that FAFSA in as soon as you can. After the FAFSA, you'll actually get a summary of all the information you put in there. It's called the Student Aid Report or the STAR Report. We use lots and lots of acronyms in financial aid. You will get used to it, I promise, down the road. But the STAR Report is something, now in this case is an example of something that would have been mailed to the student, but 9 times out of 10 these days it's actually emailed. So whatever email address you put into the FAFSA, you can put a student one and a parent one in there. This information will be emailed directly to that email address. I wanted to highlight on here, you also have your data release number, the DRN number. It's a 4-digit number. This is important to know because if, let's say, you applied to a school, but you didn't actually submit the FAFSA form to them, you did it to other schools. If you give them the school this number, they can actually add themselves to the FAFSA so that they actually receive that information. So you might be asked for this to keep important. Change every year. The DRN number will change every year. And then your expected family contribution, or EFC. What these mean in a little bit, but right here in this particular, it's a 0, but it could be 2,000, 5,000, 200, could be whatever, and that's based upon the formula the government uses, based upon all the information, assets, income, number in household, number in college, all that information goes into their process, and then they produce this EFC. But the little asterisk over here means that the student was selected for verification. And the C code, you don't want to see a C code. That means that there is conflicting information or something that needs to be resolved. A lot of times it could be due to the select not being completed. It could be due to SIP not being able to be confirmed on the federal end. Either asterisk or a C code, it means that there's additional either to FAFSA or to the school themselves. So again, this is typically emailed, but if there's no valid email address on file, it would be sent out in the mail. FAFSA form, you can actually list up to 10 schools that you want the information to be sent to. Now, I know sometimes students have more than 10 schools that they're applying to. That's perfectly fine. What you would do in those cases, you would list the 10 schools that you want to attend, wait for the FAFSA to process. I give it about a week, then go back in, take some schools off, and then put other schools on. Please keep a list of the schools you're taking off and putting on, because what can happen is, let's say, you take one school off to add, another one, but you actually end up going to the school you took off. They're not going to be getting any of the updated information if a change is made or something. So it's very important to keep track of what schools you're adding and taking off. Each school will receive the FAFSA electronically within 3 to 5 business days. Most times it's really within 3 days. If there's a holiday or something thrown in there, or maybe the weekend, it might take a little bit longer for the schools to get it, but it's a pretty quick process. I do highly recommend doing this electronically. You can still do a paper one, but trust me, it takes much, much longer for that to process. It can take, 3 to 4 weeks potentially for that to be processed through the federal processor, whereas again, online, 3 to 5 days, the schools will have it. And then once the schools do have your FAFSA, they will match that up with, assuming you're accepted to the school, we'll match up your acceptance with your FAFSA, and we will put together a financial aid package for you. And once those packages are ready, we will start sending those out. And you will see pretty much a wide range of when those award letters, as we call them, are sent out. It could be November for some schools, through all the way through potentially, March or April, just depending upon the school. They might wait until they have all their applications in before they start, awarding students. Here at Niagara, we're like on a rolling basis, so as soon as we get those in, we start putting those together. We personally don't send those out until after the Christmas break, just because we're still waiting for some information to come in. But you're going to see that range. So don't panic if you get, one award letter in November and you don't hear from anybody else until, January or February. Perfectly normal. It just kind of depends on the school. I definitely recommend reaching out to the schools if you're, have concerns, and just say, hey, can you just tell me what the timeline is? It might be on the website, but always give them, bell just to see when they might be, when their own processes are. Great. So now that I went over the FAFSA requirements and what will be needed, again, feel free to pop those questions in the chat and we can get those later. But now I wanted to kind of transition into some of the things you're going to hear a lot as you're going throughout the process. And I wanted to go over what they mean because, as I said before, there's a lot of acronyms in financial aid. We use them all the time, and sometimes we forget that just because we know what they mean doesn't mean that everybody else does. So I wanted to give you some of the major ones that we go over and break them down a little bit. So what is the cost of attendance, or the COA? So the cost of attendance is a combination of direct cost and indirect cost. So direct costs are things such as tuition, fees, room and board, books potentially, things that are charged directly to the student's account. And the indirect cost are potentially books and supplies. Not every school charges them directly. Transportation cost, personal cost, room and board if they're a commuter. The things that we know students will encounter budget-wise, but they're not things that are charged directly to the student. So your indirect and your direct cost make up the cost of attendance. This can vary widely from school to school, clearly, because schools have different costs. So a state school might have a much lower cost of attendance as compared to a private school. It just depends. So it is just important to note this because you'll hear a lot, well, we can't go over your cost of attendance. So let's say you're applying for a loan to cover the balance, or maybe you want a little bit more for, other expenses. We are limited for financial aid purposes, for federal regulations, that we cannot award any aid above and beyond the cost of attendance. So if you take out, let's say, a $30,000 loan or something, and the cost of attendance is only $20,000, you can't have that full $30,000 loan. So there are cutoffs. They are federal regulations. So keep that in mind as you're going along with the financial aid process. If you hear that. And I mentioned this on the student aid report, is the expected family contribution, or your EFC. So this is, again, it's based upon that federal process and that formula, and it is the amount a family can reasonably be expected to contribute towards the college experience. And by family, they mean student and parents. Again, parent contribution and a student contribution. It does stay the same regardless of what college you're going to. So whether you're going to a state school or private school, the EFC is going to remain the same because it is based upon that federal calculation. Just because you have a zero EFC, meaning that you are reasonably expected to contribute $0 towards the education, does not necessarily mean that that is what your remaining balance is going to be. Potentially the state school, that could be the case because potentially, Pell Grant, that went ahead a little bit, Pell Grant or TAP grants or something might cover all the expenses, and there would not be any additional things that you have to provide. But typically at a private school, although you would probably receive a higher amount of financial aid, you would not actually, most times you will still have a, all right, there's a question, let me see really quick. We'll get back to that question in just a second. So financial need. So you have your cost of attendance, which is your, direct and indirect cost. You then have your expected family contribution. So in order for schools to determine financial need, we take your cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution, and that remaining number is your financial need. And what that means is that schools can award students need-based aid up to that amount. This could be Pell Grants, TAP grants, institutional grants from the university or college that are based upon financial need. This would include work study, subsidized loans, anything that is considered a need-based grant or award or loan. this is how that is determined. So again, every student is different. It is hard to compare one package to another because again, it is based upon that family contribution and the cost of attendance for each student in each school. So it really just does depend on each individual person. So it is kind of hard to compare. You might say, oh, why did my cousin get this, but I only got this? It's probably based upon those need calculations. Okay. So when you get your financial aid package, you're going to see lots of different things on there. So I wanted to go over the types of financial aid that you're most likely going to see when you start receiving and reviewing these financial aid packages. You have your scholarships, your grants. These are free money. Everyone wants that, right? Stuff that you don't have to pay back. Then you have your loans and your employment. So the loans, typically, these are federal loans, subsidized or unsubsidized loans, private loans, Parent Plus loans, or employment, which would be typically like a work-study job or maybe another on-campus job where the student is working on campus and they get paid, but they do have to work in order to earn that award. So the first two things are, free money, we like those. The last two things, either you have to pay it back after you're done with school, or you have to work in order to earn that award. So those are the main four categories of awards that would fall into the package. The largest, or the sources of financial aid that are supporting all these awards and funds, the federal government, they're the largest source by far. The states, if you are attending a New York State school and you're a New York State resident, you might be eligible for some state grants. There's private sources, such as like civic organizations, churches, employers, and of course, also, I keep forgetting to put this in the slide, but institutions themselves, whether it's merit-based scholarships that we're awarding or potentially need-based grants, we're also a pretty large source of financial aid as well. Largest source of financial aid, as I stated before. Now, aid through the federal government, again, based upon your FAFSA form, and also based or awarded primarily on the basis of financial need. So opportunity grants, Pell grants, work studies, subsidized loans, all those are need-based. So if those are not showing up in your financial aid package, most likely it's because you don't have that need level based upon that calculation. And it is something that you have to apply for every single year. So you completed the FAFSA form for your freshman year, have to do it again. The nice thing is that you can do the renewal FAFSA, and it doesn't take as long to do. I would say for the first year that you're doing the FAFSA, probably budget a good 45 minutes or so, just so you kind of get used to all the questions and knowing where to pull stuff from if you need to. But after that, on the following years, you're just updating the tax information, which again, you can use the data retrieval tool and some other basic information. But a lot of it just kind of follows, moves forward. The most common federal aid programs you're going to see, there is the Pell Grant that I keep on mentioning. This one is not necessarily based upon your income. It is based upon solely the EFC calculation. So right now the EFC cutoff is if you're about 5,700 or less for your EFC, you would be eligible for the Pell Grant. And that can range anywhere from a couple $100s all the way up to about 6,300 for the year. There's the Teach Grant, which this is specifically for students going into the education field. And they have to, there's a lot of criteria you have to meet for this. You have to be going into specific majors, going into that are typically serving underserved populations, and you do have to find a job within those districts after you graduate. Otherwise, it turns into a loan. So want to mention it, but just know that it can potentially turn into a loan if you don't meet other requirements. There's the Opportunity Grant. This is based upon being Pell Grant eligible in order to award this. I just wanted to note, though, that schools are typically awarded a very small portion of this, so there's not a lot of funding of this to go around. So as compared to the Pell Grant, where if you're eligible for it, you get it. It doesn't matter how many students the school has, you would be eligible for it based upon your financial contribution. The Opportunity Grant, even though you might technically be eligible for it, it might not be in your package only because of the limited amount of funding that each schools do receive. Then there's the Federal Work-Study Program. Again, this is a need-based. You do have to have financial need in order to be awarded the Federal Work-Study Program. Students typically work on campus. At Niagara specifically, they work between 10 to 12 hours a week on campus, and then they can use the money as a paycheck or have it go towards their account. This is the one program that I talked about earlier that we have very limited positions for. So again, even though you might be financially eligible, it might not be in your package just due to the restrictions of the number of positions at each school. Then there's subsidized, unsubsidized loans. These are federal loans in the student's name. So technically your FAFSA application is the application for these loans through the federal government for the student. Subsidized means that the government pays the interest on the loan while the student's in school. Unsubsidized means that they don't. The subsidized, again, is a need-based. So you do have to have financial need in your package in order to be awarded that. And the unsubsidized loan, anyone can get that, whether you have need or not. There are limits on how much students can have each year. They start out for a total of $5,500 for their freshman year, goes up to $6,500 for their sophomore year, and then junior and senior years, you can have $7,500 each. And again, that could be all unsub, or it could be a combination of subsidized and unsubsidized. The interest rates right now are really low. This is the lowest I've seen them since I've started. We're just a little over 2% for these loans, so they're not bad loans to have right now at all. And then the PLUS loan, it is a federal loan, but it's actually in the parent's name, so it's really called the Parent PLUS loan. This is something that the parents would apply for in order to maybe help out with the remaining balance or whatnot. It is, again, in the parent's name, and the parent's name only. There is no way for you to transfer it over to the student at another time. Okay, on to the states. So I did mention earlier that in order to be eligible for a New York State award, you do have to be a New York State resident and attending a New York State school. So let's say you want to go to Pennsylvania for school, you cannot take these scholarships with you. You have to be attending New York State institutions. Now, most of the aid from New York State is based upon need, which is through the TAP grant, the Tuition Assistance Program. This one there is an income cutoff, unlike Pell. There is a cutoff. So it is a combination of student and parent New York State net taxable income. If you're 80,000 or below, again combined, then you would be eligible for the TAP grant. They also have some merit-based grants, and they also have the Excelsior or the Enhanced Tuition Award programs. That for Excelsior, if you're attending a state school and your income is currently $125,000 or less, you could apply for this program to have your tuition covered. It is tuition minus any Pell Grant, any TAP grant. So you might already be receiving full tuition based upon those programs, but if not, and your income is below that 125 level, you would potentially be eligible for this. There are a lot of requirements, so I do recommend looking at the New York State website or inquiring at the state schools about the program requirements. Students have to complete a total of 30 credit hours each academic year, so it's 15 credits a semester. You have to maintain academic progress. You really can't take any gaps. You have to stay in New York State for as long as you receive it. So let's say you receive the award for 2 years. You also have to stay in New York State for 2 years after graduation. And then there's a couple other things that I know I'm missing. But so there's a lot of things to look into before you apply for it. And of course, unfortunately, with all the budget issues that are going on with New York State, we don't know how much of it will be funded for the upcoming year. That has not been announced yet. But it is something to look into if the opportunity presents itself. The information you can actually, when filling out, it is a separate application. I do want to note this because sometimes people get confused on this. So when you're completing the FAFSA form, after you hit the submit button on the FAFSA, at the very end of the confirmation page that pops up, it will ask you, do you want to complete your state application? I recommend saying yes, because what it does is it will actually transfer the information from that you already did on the FAFSA into the state application. There'll be a few more questions you have to answer on the state application, but it does transfer the information over. If it does save time. If you don't do it at that time, it's okay, but you'll have to wait about a week for the FAFSA to process and send the information to New York State before you then go directly to the New York State website and do the whole application without having any of the information transferred. So it's okay if you don't do it right away. I know sometimes you get kind of frustrated after filling out the FAFSA, you're just done and you don't want to do it at that time. But if you are able to, I do recommend, just because it does save time on your end for having to fill that out, and it's a good way to remember it. The deadlines vary by state to state. New York State has a pretty generous deadline, kind of keep on going, but please make sure you have that. I always recommend having the state application done prior to when you start school, so that all the information can be properly credited towards your account. Also, please note that unlike the FAFSA, where you can list up to 10 schools at a time, the state application, you get one. So if you transfer the information from the FAFSA, it's only taking the first school that's listed on there. So if you don't end up going to that school that you listed first on the FAFSA, you need to be sure to update that information within the state application by the time, once you make your decision, of course. Okay. So besides federal government and besides the state, and besides, of course, the institution themselves, which they can provide typically merit scholarships or need-based scholarships or other grants for a variety of things, I also recommend looking for private sources, whether these are, community foundations or businesses or charitable organizations or maybe your employer, like Wegmans, I know has scholarships for students. I really recommend doing this, kind of looking for stuff now in the fall. Typically applications kind of are open up between January and they're due March or April, for a lot of these outside private organizations. The one I really like to recommend all the time is the Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo. They are a great resource. I have seen students receive anywhere from $500 to $6,000 to go towards their yearly cost. So it's a great thing to kind of be on the lookout for. I'm sure, high school counselors are aware of scholarships that maybe are specific to that high school. You can check with each schools as the colleges you're applying to. They might know of local ones as well, but please start researching these and getting everything put together. Yes, you might have to write an essay, or the student might have to write an essay. When I do my presentations at Niagara, I always say, when I was a senior, I did not want to write those essays. I didn't have the time for it, so I didn't do it. I also didn't get any extra money. And being on the other side of the house now, seeing how much money is out there that is coming in for some students, it's just mind-boggling sometimes. So it's definitely worth to write that essay, reuse it if you have to, make sure you take out the names that are supposed, change up the names. But please kind of keep an eye out this. Even if $500 helps, that could pay for books. Also, I like to mention that also gets brought up a lot is special conditions or appeals. So we know that things happen, especially this year with everything going on. Income could have drastically changed, been reduced, not happening at all anymore. So if something has changed since 2019, clearly a lot has, and the information on the FAFSA is no longer valid as far as the income goes, please reach out to the schools that you're applying to. We might be able to do what we call professional judgment, where we would ask for additional documentation to show the change in income or unemployment benefits or whatever the case might be. And then we will actually be able to go ahead and see if we can adjust the FAFSA to then hopefully reduce the financial contribution on the FAFSA and then increase the aid that we're able to offer. So don't hesitate in contacting schools. I will say though that maybe you don't want, if you're applying to 10 schools, maybe don't do it to all 10. I would really focus on the ones that you're truly interested in attending, only because it can be a lot of additional, paperwork and stuff that you have to submit to the schools. So I do recommend kind of just focusing on the ones that you're truly interested in, and then providing them all that documentation. And each school will probably have its own process. Now, in some circumstances, maybe nothing has really changed financially. This also, I wanted to say, applies for potential, separation or divorce situations. If, you fill out the FAFSA and then something changes, also contact the school for those cases as well. But in some cases, maybe nothing has changed, but you get your financial aid package and you just, need some additional funding. We get that all the time. Please feel free to reach out and contact the schools. The worst thing we can say is no. Right now, at least at the private schools, I know everyone's trying to do all that they can to make sure that students are able to attend. So, but know that no could be an answer, and that maybe, there's only so much that school can do, because, we do have to kind of spread the wealth around and help out a lot of different students. But we are doing what we can. So please feel free, once you get your financial aid package, if you don't feel that it's adequate enough, or you're just know that you won't be able to, make that type of payment, contact the school and see what they can do. Also, schools might ask for other, if you have other award letters that you're comparing us to, other schools, you might have to provide those to the to the school you're appealing to. So kind of have those all in one, one place ready to go. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is this is actually in the purple. Well, it's purple to me, but it's probably not purple to you. It's just white. But at the very last page 9 of the booklet that I sent out, or is in the chat feature at the very top. This is the financial aid award letter worksheet. Please use this or a version of it when you start getting the financial aid packages in, because what you really need to do is you really need to compare apples to apples. You really need to see, okay, what exactly am I going to be charged? What are all the fees? What are all, tuition fees? Am I living on campus, room and board at this school? And then write down any of the grants and the work study and the loans that you're getting from the schools to really see, I'll hit on the next page, really see what the bottom line is. Because, I've had students before where, they get one package from a school and they have, let's say, a $30,000 package. And they have another, one maybe from us, and it's only like $20,000. But that school that gave you that $30,000 award, they might cost $60,000, or maybe the other school only cost, $40,000. So you really have to do the math and do the breakdown to make sure you're really comparing it one-on-one. just because I know sometimes you can get really excited about seeing like a really large amount of aid that a school has given you, but you don't realize just how much it actually costs up top. So again, make sure you're kind of doing that comparison as you start getting those financial aid packages in, and also help you when you want to go, if you need to do an appeal to a school, to kind of see that breakdown as well. Okay, we'll get to questions in a minute. Please feel free to contact our office, like I said at the very beginning. Whether it's about Niagara or not, doesn't matter. If you have any questions about financial aid or the FAFSA, we are more than happy to help. There's my information. The 8686 number is our general number to get someone at the front desk, but there's my email if you needed to reach out to me directly. Okay, I'm going to check, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am actually going to chat. So if you have any questions, please feel free to get those in there. So one question is that we receive, let's see, free lunches under the school program. Is still able to be checked off in a box? Yes. So the free reduced lunch, you would just check the box saying that on the parent's end that someone in the household receives that. Yep, and if you're receiving SNAP benefits, whether it's free reduced lunch or SNAP, you would just check those boxes when you're in the FAFSA. Any other questions for me?
Does that look like it's it, Katie, for questions?
I'll stop recording, but I'll give it another minute or two in case anybody does have anything extra.
Okay.